Hello, welcome to our podcast series on localizing cooking fuel debates amid climate change and energy transition dilemmas in Uganda and Tanzania, with a focus on charcoal. I am Ngogo from St. Augustine University, where I'm also a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Social Sciences. In this episode, titled Migration, Conflict, and Charcoal in Tanzania, we invite you to explore the connection between the charcoal value chain, migration, and conflicts, as well as the pathways toward a sustainable energy transition in Tanzania. Joining me from this discussion is the esteemed Dr. Mathew Bukhi Mabele, a lecturer and a conservation social scientist at the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies at the University of Dodoma, Tanzania. Dr. Mabele is a recognized expert in the governance, specifically access, use, and justice of human-environment interaction in tropical ecosystem, with a particular focus on charcoal and policy governance. Our main question is a migration charcoal frontier. In Tanzania, as in many parts of East Africa, charcoal is more than just a fuel. It is tied to migration, settlement, and livelihood strategies. Movement of people often opens up new frontier of charcoal production, sometimes leading to conflict. Dr. Mabele, from your research, how does migration shape charcoal production and the trade in Tanzania's tropical ecosystem?
Yeah, so thank you, Ngogo, for this opportunity for this podcast session. Yeah, so as you have explained from the beginning, charcoal and migration in Tanzania is a bit different when you compare it to the aspect of charcoal and migration in Uganda. But that doesn't mean some of those aspects can also, be found in the context of Tanzania, especially when you think of, the charcoal frontiers. Most of these frontiers are found in places where they are endowed with forest resources. So when you think of such frontiers in Tanzania, you think of places like Tabora, east central parts of Tanzania, so in Morogoro, Kilosa specifically, and even rural Morogoro, but also when you think of some parts of the coastal region, all the way down to Lindi and also Ruvuma, because those are the places that are endowed with forest resources. So that's the thing. And one aspect of interest, at least from experience in my research, when it comes to issues of migration, and in our previous discussions that we have had in Makerere and so on, I've read that you have also gone to Kilosa as one of the study sites. And in Kilosa, there's a very interesting aspect when it comes to charcoal migration. So in Kilosa, there is a village called Ihombwe. I don't know if you went to Ihombwe, but there's a village called Ihombwe.
Okay.
And there's a tribe called Malila. They are from around Mbeya.
Okay.
And this, they are known to be very good at making charcoal. So very good at producing charcoal. Actually, there are stories that they can even make kilns that they can even produce 100 to 200 bags of charcoal in a single kiln, which is just tremendous in terms of charcoal making.
You mean the ethanol kilns?
Yes,
okay.
In a single kiln, producing 100 to 200 bags of charcoal. So they are known to be one of the most prolific charcoal producers. They even cut across even to Zambia because of their, expertise and skills. So, but they did migrate from that part, from around Mbeya to Kilosa, and they tend to be specific producers. So they they just migrate specifically to producing charcoal, which is a bit different from how most of the charcoal producers are, which is like most of them are farmers. When they clear land and then they produce charcoal to just supplement their subsistence and their income. But the Malila, a specific tribe, they engage in charcoal as commercial producers, so they do tend to be hired by the traders so that they can produce charcoal. So that is one of the aspects that I have come across my research in terms of this charcoal migration dynamics, because this is a very specific tribe, and they do tend to migrate to places where there are charcoal frontiers, places that are endowed with forest resources, and they do engage in this charcoal production and charcoal business. Yeah, but the other aspect that I would like also to share, from experience and research, as I've said, in southern parts of Tanzania, around Lindi and Ruvuma, there have been cases of migrants from different parts of Tanzania. In Lindi, specifically in Kilwa, there have been cases of migrants from Iringa, the Hay people, who also, as you know, charcoal making is very rebellious activity. And in some of these places, like in Kilosa, but also in Lindi, the natives, there's a stereotype around these people that are the natives around these places, that they cannot do such laborious activities like charcoal making. So you find those who engage in charcoal making, they are migrants, and the people like the Malila, but also for the case of Kilwa, the Hay, because they tend to be able to do such a laborious activity. Yeah, so, just in a nutshell, I think that is what I've come across my research in terms of how certain communities in Tanzania migrate to places that are endowed with forest resources, so potential places that have, the frontier dynamics, places that have plenty of resources to producing charcoal, and then they do engage in such activity. And so that's I could just say
thank you.
Like that.
Thank you, Dr. Mabele. So you have said there have been some people who have been migrating from different place to another in terms of conducting the charcoal burning activities. And then now, do these migrants and the host community, do they clash over access to resources and access to forests and access for land in terms of the charcoal production?
Yeah, interestingly, at least from the two places that I've said, Kilosa and Kilwa,
yes,
I didn't come across conflicts. Actually, the locals do like these migrant charcoal producers, because they do sustain and support the local economy. Because most of these migrants, at least from the two districts that I've said, they tend to be, because they do produce this charcoal commercially, so they tend to have some additional income, and then that could support some local economic activities. Like in Kilosa, there is a village, a hamlet called, I can't remember the name, but that's a village actually emerged out of these migrating Malila charcoal producers.
Oh, really?
So Mbegesela, it's called Mbegesela.
Mbegesela in Kilosa.
In Kilosa, Ihombo village.
Okay.
So they did migrate, and then they settled in that part of the village, and then the sub-village, started to grow, and some local businesses started to grow out of the presence of these migrant charcoal producers, because, as I've said, they do produce charcoal commercially, so they have some additional income more than the locals, and then that can facilitate and sustain some of the local activities like local brewing, pombe za kienyeji, and so mama lishe, mama ntilie, all this. So the locals do like them, because they do such. They are spenders, I would say, in a nutshell. That they are spenders, so the locals do like them because they have some additional income. So from my experience, I never came across conflict, but it's more coexistence between these migrating charcoal producers and the locals, and particularly for the case of the Yombwe village, but also even in Kilwa, the stories that I've told you about the hair, I mean, they are more of a positive stories in terms of having them as producing charcoal, but also in some cases there are also negative stories because, as I've said, the locals in around Kilwa, there are stereotypes that these are not very laborious people, kwamba they are some kind of wavivu, watu wa pwani wanavyosemaga. So they are a bit jealous, of this hehe coming and be laborious and producing charcoal and selling, but also because of the location of Kilwa and some of those villages being alongside the highway to Mtwara, so there is plenty of opportunities for them to sell charcoal. That makes it a bit jealous for the locals because they do produce charcoal and sell charcoal. So if you think of some very minor conflicts, you can think of that, but it's not as significant as the coexistence that they have established because of the presence of the charcoal business.
Yeah, thank you so much in that particular aspect of charcoal frontier and also the conflict that might arise between the immigrants and also the host community. Now, let us look on charcoal conflict and justice.
Yeah.
Charcoal production often raises issues of access, sometimes control and justice. Policies and bans sometimes end up punishing the poor, while the powerful actors continue with the business as usual. So how do charcoal policies and governance or frameworks in Tanzania intersect with the question of justice, equity, and conflict?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's also one of the aspects that we have engaged in the research around charcoal in Tanzania. So charcoal in Tanzania is a very complex and it's a very complex product and commodity, which brings a lot of which is also quite connected with a lot of politics, So as you have said, the policy landscape in Tanzania it's not very clear when it comes to the question of charcoal. As you've said, now we know there are bans of charcoal use, charcoal consumption in public institutions that are serving more than, I think, 100 people. And then, but on the other side, you have a national charcoal strategy and action plan that acknowledges the significance of charcoal as an energy, as a forest product, but also as a potential revenue-generating commodity. So, but also the strategy also has acknowledged the presence of this model that I've also been talking about, the sustainable charcoal production model that started in Kilosa with support of the Tanzania Forest Conservation Group, TFCG, where they have instituted and tried to formalize and regulate production of charcoal that doesn't bring negative impacts on forest ecosystems. So they've introduced a number of activities and a number of practices that aim to make charcoal production sustainable. So like in terms of tree harvesting practices, so the size, 20 centimeter, the DBH, the height, they're supposed to be at least a knee height, but also how you cut the trees to leave the stump. Mti unapaswa ukatwe kwa ulalo. When it rains, the water doesn't settle, ile stump isiweze kuoza to facilitate regeneration. And but also in terms of an improved basic air kiln, in terms of how they construct the kilns, but also in terms of how they do take care of the kilns, So that system, it seems to be working, and even the government acknowledges that. That's why in the National Charcoal Strategy and Action Plan, it has been mentioned, and actually the strategy proposes that that should also be upscaled in other parts of Tanzania. So that's, if you think of the policy landscape, that's the policy landscape, because you have a national charcoal strategy. So it seems that the government acknowledges that. But when it comes to some of the practices, that's why I say it's a very complex commodity and a very complex topic, because when it comes to some of the practices, it looks like charcoal is an illegal activity, despite the fact that now you have a national charcoal strategy, but it seems like it is an illegal activity. And this is the problem, because you have a national forest agency, the Tanzania Forest Service Agency, who is the custodian of all forest resources in Tanzania, on behalf of the president, of course, and the citizens. And then we have some of these activities taking place in forest reserves that have no management plans. So there are no plans how to harvest, what kind of species to harvest, what kind of species not to harvest for particular activity, for particular use, if it's charcoal making. And then you have activities from that model, the sustainable charcoal production model, that are taking place in village land forest reserves, where you have management plans, which specifies and designates specific forest management areas or units where charcoal production can be done sustainably. So that's why I've said in practice it is complicated and is kind of illegal, because for the charcoal that are coming in places that have no management plans, that's where the problem is, because of this, the lack of management plans, and then the potential for such places, for potential for charcoal production in such places to cause more harm to to the forest ecosystems. But for TFS, it doesn't matter, even if it comes from places that have no management plans, as long as it brings revenues, as long as the producers and the sellers can pay the tariffs, and then that's not a problem. So the policy landscape is such it is of such a complexity because of the presence of a national charcoal strategy and action plan, which kind of acknowledges and appreciates and embraces this idea of sustainability in making charcoal. But when it comes to some of the practices, especially for forest reserves that have no management plans, which is most of the case or most of the forest reserves that are under TFS, so that makes charcoal that comes from such places some kind of an illegal activity, So the landscape is of such a complexity, and but the good thing, at least we have a national charcoal strategy and action plan that acknowledges the presence of the possibility and the potential for producing charcoal sustainably, But when it comes to implementation, then, as I've said, there are some issues, but at least we have a starting point, to making the policy landscape for charcoal more conducive. And actually, we also, just to finish, we also did, we had an assignment to study policy conduciveness when it comes to charcoal sustainability in Africa. We did look on countries that have ratified the African Forest Restoration Initiative, the AFRI 100, and Tanzania is one of the countries. And so, from that perspective, the policy landscape in Tanzania, when it comes to charcoal, actually is sort of more conducive because of the presence of the National Charcoal Strategy and Action Plan, because the charcoal strategy acknowledges the potential for producing charcoal sustainably. It is quite different from other countries, like in Kenya, where the conduciveness is not as positive as in Tanzania. And so on. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So you have said there are some areas that have the participatory community-based forest management.
Yeah.
And do you think existing of these community-based forest management, do they reduce tension, or what do you think in terms of governance when you have a forest which is sustainably managed and the other one is not sustainably managed? Where do you think there is maybe? Where do you think tensions come from between these two kind of forest management?
Regimes. So there are tensions, as I've said. So you have the village land forest reserves. That's where the community-based forest management schemes takes place. And then we have the national forest reserves and local government forest reserves. And this, especially the national forest reserves, they are under they are being managed by the TFS. So, as I've said also, in most of these national forest reserves, they don't have management plans. And I mean, one of the common excuses is that TFS doesn't have money to do the management plans. But in the village land forest reserves, where the CBFM schemes take place, for a village land forest reserves to be, or for a CBFM scheme to begin, you need to do land use planning. So most of these, or if not all of them, they have management plans. So, and the management plans also goes with specific bylaws in terms of how to use, how to manage, and how to govern, those are forest resources. So for that matter, village land, for CBFM schemes, for production that takes place, for charcoal production that takes place in a CBFM scheme, the possibility and ways and mechanisms to deal with any kind of conflicts and tensions are there.
Okay.
There's a structure in the management plan, but also because of the bylaws. So that facilitate and makes the governing of the access to resources, the use of resources, and how even some of the revenues that are generated are distributed. So there is a structure that puts, that helps to manage the tension because of the presence of such a structure, which is also supported by some of the national policy and regulatory frameworks. Okay. But the problem comes, as I've said, charcoal is a very complex product, commodity. At least from recent reports, charcoal is one of the major sources of revenues for the Tanzania Forest Service Agents. And then you have production taking place in CBFM schemes. And according to the national CBFM guidelines of 2007, and also I think the new one, the 2013, in a CBFM scheme, any kind of productive forest use that takes place in a CBFM scheme, the village, through the village council, has powers to retain 100% of the generated revenues. Okay. So that is also applies for charcoal. But as I've said, charcoal is one of the major sources, if not number one, sources of revenue for TFS. So what it means, tensions come, because TFS then start fighting with the village councils where these in the CBFM schemes where they do charcoal production, because they can retain 100% of the charcoal revenues. So that creates tensions and the potential conflicts, because TFS sees these villages as competitors, they see as they're competing for them to generate revenues. And unfortunately, which is, is not mostly said, but TFS is also given some revenue collection targets by the government, so they have to meet some collection targets. So that creates a tension.
Also, that you mean they are creating some tug of war between the village councils and also the government actors, and they end up in having the losers and benefits.
So the losses is that because TFS sees these village councils as competitors, but not as important stakeholders in managing forest resources, and then sometimes. And because TFS is the national regulatory agents, so they also find they also have authority to create some regulations. And one of the regulations that I've created is the pricings of charcoal, and that is one of the ways that TFS can pin down the village councils because of the creation of the suggestions of the prices of charcoals, which makes buying charcoal in a CBFM scheme not as competitive as competitive as enough, because it discourages buyers to go and buy in a CBFM scheme. So that makes such a tension and conflict.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mabele. So as we are proceeding at the end of our episode, now let us look on the transition beyond charcoal. Or as you know, with the global climate change and the national energy transition, there is a pressure to move beyond charcoal. Yet for many households, charcoal remains culturally embedded, affordable, and also accessible. So, Dr. Mabele, what do you see as a realistic and just pathways for Tanzania to transition from charcoal while safeguarding livelihoods and reducing conflicts?
So I think that one of the potential social and ecologically just pathways in this transition is the sustainable charcoal production. Because, as we know, research indicates that in southern and eastern Africa, the demand for charcoal is likely not to decrease over the next 20 or 30 years. So charcoal is here to stay over the next 20 to 30 years. So but also the dynamics around alternative energy sources are very complex. As I've said, the issues of affordability, reliability, accessibility. So that makes alternative sources not as realistic as soon as we anticipate, despite the fact of the push by the government through the National Clean Cooking Energy Strategy to end, charcoal, as you've said. So the pathway is just to go with sustainable charcoal production, because some of the preliminary research indicates that the sustainable charcoal production model can work, and is very fitting to the dominant forest biome in Tanzania, which is the Miombo woodlands. It fits exactly with the dynamics of the Miombo woodlands, especially when it is being done under different cutting practices, being either selective cutting or in some cases, clear felling, although the model now prefers to use selective cutting because of some of the species being of biodiversity value or habitats for species and so on. So it works because it has shown that potential for ecological sustainability. Because in some of the places where they have harvested charcoal in that sustainable production model, which started in 2012, if you visit some of those places, you can see trees are starting to regenerate, And so that shows that such a model can work. So while at the time that there is questions around accessibility, affordability, and the reliability of the alternative energy sources, we cannot just move away from charcoal, because we need just to find ways how we can produce charcoal sustainably while we are still creating infrastructure and conducive environment for the alternative energy sources. So I think that is the socially and ecologically just pathway that we can use. Just go with charcoal production, but we can make it more sustainable while we are trying to create infrastructure and environment for the alternative energy sources.
Are LPGs and electricity briquettes viable at scale in Tanzania if people are now adapting new clean cooking energy? Are they viable? Are they? What can you say? Are they at scale? Are they available, accessible? What's the status?
There are improvements. When you think of solar, for instance, you can see now even the villages, we have all this solar energy. Although it might be in a very small scale, just maybe to light some lights in the house. But also now you can see there are plenty of LPG suppliers. In the past we used to have very few of them, but now there are plenty of LPG suppliers. And briquettes is not as much, I think, in Tanzania as maybe in other parts of East Africa, like in Kenya. I think it's more in Kenya, the use of briquettes. But there are some, initiatives. I've seen there is one initiative from Stamico where they're also producing briquettes. I think from ashes of, if I'm not mistaken, from ashes of coal, but I'm not sure. I cannot say that. And then LPG, of course, as I've said. But the problem is with these alternative energy sources, as you pointed out, there's the issue of affordability. For instance, the 30 kg of LPG in most of the urban areas in Tanzania is around 53,000, the 30 kg. So in a household where you have maybe around 5 people, you might need 2 of those in a month. So that is more than 100,000 T shillings. So how many Tanzanian households can afford, such a cost in a month? So there is the issue for affordability, despite that they have maybe increased accessibility because of the many suppliers for LPG, but there is also a question of affordability. How many Tanzanian households can afford paying 100,000 T shillings per month just to buy the gas? So the viability, there are a lot of questions, and the questions are concerning affordability. They might not be concerning about accessibility, because now there are many of them, the suppliers, but there's the issue of affordability, and that makes the viability of such alternative energy sources such as LPG very much questionable. And that goes back to what I've said. Maybe while we're still trying to create the infrastructure and the environment conducive for the alternative energy sources, we should not chase away from charcoal. We just try to think how we can make it more sustainable.
Thank you so much, our dear listeners. Now we have reached the end of our episode, and today I was joined by Dr. Mathew Bukhi Mabele, who is a lecturer and also a conservation social scientist at the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies at the University of Dodoma, Tanzania. And Dr. Mabele is a very well recognized expert in the governance, specifically access, use, and justice of human-environment interaction in tropical ecosystem, with a particular focus on charcoal and police government. Also, Dr. Mabele has published a lot of papers on charcoal. You can search and see how he has written on that particular area. Now we have reached the conclusion of our episode on migration, conflict, and charcoal in Tanzania. We hope this discussion has enhanced your understanding of the deep connection between migration and charcoal, as well as the necessity for equitable governance that facilitates a just transition tailored to specific contexts. We encourage you to share your feedback and to join us for the next episode in our series addressing the localization of cooking fuel debates in the context of climate change and energy transition challenges facing Uganda and Tanzania, with a particular emphasis on charcoal. Thank you so much. You were with me, your host, Ngogo from St. Augustine, University of Tanzania. Thank you, and see you soon.